Hello and welcome to video number 3. We're going to talk about how to increase your actual attendee rate. Of course, this is a biggest problem that other marketers and other business owners face is getting their registrants to actually show up. But not you though, because you're about to learn some strategies on how to combat that. So how do we get people from maybe no or from maybe to yes? Well, what we can do is start with the basics. If you look at what things are successful and even how we are convinced to buy something from someone that we know, like, and trust, if we think about it, it often starts with mini actions. Things that we do that ultimately lead up to the purchase. So that might mean signing up for the webinar. That might mean downloading a checklist that the webinar host gives me. That might mean taking that checklist and spending 5 minutes on it, or doing something that checklist asks me to do. So many actions, if you do it in such a manner that it gains trust and you add value to that, because we're not just talking about any action, we're talking about specific actions that allow you to build a relationship with people, gain their trust, add value, add content, which becomes mini commitments. And these mini commitments ultimately become mini transactions. And of course, mini transactions ultimately become bigger transactions if they value your products, your services, and so forth. So if you have a better understanding of that, you'll understand why I recommend these strategies here. So let's talk about mini actions. How do we get people to take action initially when they sign up for the webinar? To do that, what we can do is we can give a checklist or an action list or a PDF file. You generally don't want to have something that's too long, but you don't want to have something that's too short either. Basically, what you want to do is you want to provide something, whether it's a case study or information or action list, checklist, whatever, containing some sort of sneak peek preview of what your webinar is going to be about. So maybe you have a checklist of something people need to do before they get to the webinar so that they can use whatever they have checked off that list in the webinar. So if you're doing that, what that does is it builds curiosity in their minds to want to check out the webinar to figure out why they needed the checklist in the first place. And it creates kind of this interesting but incomplete. So in order to find the complete version, they have to attend the webinar. So obviously you want to figure out what is it that my audience wants in terms of a checklist. You don't want to just create a checklist to create a checklist. You want to create something of value that they would possibly pay for, or something that would possibly help them. Another thing you want to implement is scarcity before the webinar. Here's what I mean by that. What you want to do is you want to ensure that your follow-up emails state that there is limited seating, and you want to utilize scarcity to ensure that they show up. So what I mean by that is in your emails, you want to say something like, I'm glad you signed up for the webinar. Make sure that you show up, because even though you signed up for the webinar, we have limited seating. So maybe realistically, let's say, for example, that 200 people sign up, but with GoToWebinar, you only have the basic plan, so you can only have 100 people sign up and show up and watch the webinar. So that leaves another 100 people not able to watch the webinar. They can watch the webinar replays afterwards. But if you state that, and of course you want to make sure that is true, then that will get more people to actually attend, because they don't want to lose the opportunity of not showing up and gaining information that you would give them, especially if you have some valuable information that you're going to share. So say something like, we have limited seating and we're almost filled up. So make sure you attend the webinar. So that really helps in itself. Another thing you want to do is remove the safety net. What I mean by that is this. Don't promise webinar replays beforehand. If you think about it, a lot of times we don't attend the webinar, not because we don't want to, but because we know that there's a webinar replay and that typically is standard. Do not promise webinar replays beforehand, and if by doing that, people will most likely show up so that they don't miss your content. But at the same time, like I said earlier, don't tell people that you're not going to have a webinar replay if you are. And don't promise anything similar that would actually prevent people from showing up. Now, other content, such as giving sneak peek preview content in all of the follow-ups leading up to the webinar, is helpful. So giving them that checklist, you might want to break down that checklist, and maybe the follow-up email after that, you can say something like, I'm glad you signed up. I hope you downloaded the checklist. If you haven't, here's the link, and make sure you fill this out before the webinar, because that's going to bring you X amount of results in your business if you implement this or if you take action. So your whole goal is to get them to take those mini actions, which ultimately brings them to the mini commitments and mini transactions when you pitch or sell something on your webinar. So remind people about your action list and your checklist. And remember, don't give everything. You want to be interesting but incomplete. So build curiosity, but don't tell people what is in the webinar, like all in detail. It's okay if you talk about it, overview, and the benefits. That's fine. Another thing that can help you is social proof. So if other people have tested out your products and services and they've said something about it, then add some social proof. If you got case studies, that's awesome. You can use it. You can maybe give that away initially, and then the day after or a few days later, you can say, I hope you got a chance to check out that case study. Remember, you can implement this, and I'm going to show you more case studies in the webinar. So if you like this case study, you'll want to show up, and so forth. So if you combine everything that I talked about in this video, you will increase your sales conversions.